built on an incredibly simple concept: innovation every single time. I'm talking about the VR headset manufacturer, Pimax. Now, whether it's their 8K VR headsets or their more recent Crystal line, there's one thing that Pimax does extraordinarily well, and that's push the envelope. I'm Ron Burke, editor-in-chief for Gamingtrend.com. Today we're going to take a closer look at the Pimax Crystal Lite. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, we have them side by side, obviously. This is the Pimax 8KX. This was their flagship a couple of years ago. A couple of features on this particular headset. You can see it has this very wide front. That, plus the lenses that we're going to talk about in just a second, enable this to have a 200-degree field of view. It's hard to even describe what 200 degrees looks like, but I can tell you when I played Subnautica in VR with this, it's like having a vision out to here. So when you went under the water, it was like you were underwater. It was completely insane. This uses a lens type called a Fresnel lens. Now, Fresnel lenses have a kind of concentric circle that kind of you can see when you look at the lens. When you get a closer look at the lenses, you'll see here in a second, you can see those kind of ridges. And the problem with those lenses is that they're not so clear at the edges. You might have kind of color distortion, or you might have some blurriness at the edges. So that created some issues for some users. This uses something called an aspheric lens. The aspheric lens is completely different. Those concentric rings are gone. This uses a QLED panel. Again, we're going to get a closer look at those so you can see the differences. And with local dimming, it also is completely clear from edge to edge. So there is no discoloration. There is no loss of any sort of clarity at the edges, and it's able to maintain that clarity across the entire image. Now, what I find interesting, however, is these are very hard to change. These Fresnel lenses are difficult to pull out. They're really not meant to be changed. So if you scratch them, which if you're putting glasses on and putting these on, that can happen. Or if you simply have something get in there, that can be a real challenge. You can ruin your headset, which given the cost of these, yikes. These are actually very easy to change. And not only does that enable to change them if you scratch them, it enables you to change your IPD. It enables you to put prescription lenses in there. It enables you to change a whole number of things. There are a number of manufacturers out there. VR Rock is our chosen manufacturer that we like to partner with. At the very bottom of this write-up, you'll find a link to them. If you happen to buy lenses there, we get a little bit of a kickback, but that's not the reason why we suggest them. We suggest them because we use them and we've had great success with them. So consider it my personal endorsement. But back to the point here, they're very easy to change, and there are a number of things beyond just being able to put prescription lenses in that you can do very easily with this headset that you can't do with this one. Now, this review is not meant to compare the Crystal and the Crystal Lite, but there is something I want to point out because I know it for a fact. The 8KX, to adjust the interpupillary distance, IPD, IPD is interpupillary distance. That's the difference between your two pupils. If you find yourself having a headache or you're having trouble focusing, it's simply moving the lenses further apart or closer together. So that's accomplished with a small wheel over here. You can move the lenses in or out. And it's the same on the Pimax Crystal Lite. There's a small, where'd you go? There is a small wheel, there we go, behind the wire here that you can adjust the IPD. On the Crystal, that is done via a motor. So you can just kind of dial in the number that you want, have it adjust appropriately to the IPD that you like. It's certainly more precise. This is okay. It's obviously much better if you have multiple people using the headsets. You can just simply dial in the number that you want and have it be adjusted to exactly where it should be versus this where you kind of, it's analog, so you gotta kind of dial it in. So something to know about the Crystal and the Crystal Lite. If that IPD number, if you have a lot of people using your headset, maybe that's enough for you to jump from the Crystal to the Crystal Lite, or sorry, vice versa, the Crystal Lite to the Crystal. But yeah, this uses analog and this uses analog. Before we move off the lenses, one of the things that people are concerned about is resolution. So let's talk about that real quick. The Pimax 8KX is an 8K headset, which is to say 4K for each eye. So that's, what is that? 3140 by 2160. It took me a second there. And that's per eye. whereas this headset, the Pimax Crystal, is 2880 per eye. That makes it among the very highest of resolutions for any consumer headset. The only ones that are higher than that are the ungodly priced Varjo or Apple's headset. Apple's headset has no software and the Varjo is extraordinarily expensive, so that kind of puts this on top automatically.
Default! Woohoo!
So that just about covers all the ways that these are similar. What makes them different makes them wildly different. You'll notice that there are no cameras on the 8K. And there are cameras on the Pimax Crystal Lite. That's because this does inside-out tracking. Now, inside-out tracking, which is to say that it doesn't use any sort of external lighthouses to be able to do positional tracking. With this headset, I had to set up towers that basically have lighthouses inside. That is to say, it's a box about this big and it has a spinning electromagnet in there that tells it where it is in positional space. So when I turn my headset, it knows where that is in that three-dimensional space. This doesn't use anything like that. You put this on, you're done. That's it. These cameras track from the inside out, so it can create that 3D positional space without the need for an external device. That alone makes this infinitely easier than this to set up. If you have a space where you can set up your VR headset and you can leave those towers up with those lighthouses up, this is a phenomenal thing to use. In fact, I have set this up with multiple users and multiple headsets, which is kind of awesome. Whereas this, I throw this on my head and it's good to go. So there's some ease of use here that can't be denied. We're going to talk about these cables because obviously the first thing you're going to compare this to is the industry leader, and that is the Quest headsets, but there's some advantages to this too. Since we are going to talk about the Quest, it's inevitable. We also have to talk about some things that the Quest doesn't have. Both of these headsets have pass-through video. I should say both headsets, the Quest and the Pimax Crystal Lite, have pass-through video. So you can see around you. You can tap a button and you can see around you. That's very useful if you are firing up something and you happen to be by yourself. If you happen to be playing a flight simulator in a flight sim rig or a motion simulator, or you're driving and you need to Alt-tab into something or grab a keyboard and type something in. If you've done PCVR, you know the fun of flipping your headset up, typing something, flipping it back down, typing something. It's a giant pain. Yes, this does support that, but it's much better if I can tap this and see what I'm doing. So the 8KX does not have that. It does not have any sort of pass-through because it has no cameras, whereas this does. The Quest also has that pass-through function, but this has eye tracking. Now, eye tracking is a game changer. What it can do is something called foveated rendering. Foveated rendering is where your eyes are looking is where the most amount of resolution is focused. So it allows the video card, as long as your video card supports this, which most of them do, it will render the highest resolution where you're looking. It makes sense because at the peripheral edge, you don't necessarily need it to be maximum resolution. And it does this by magic. Let's just skip past the explanation and just say it does it by magic. So when you're looking over here, it's not necessarily rendering this at as high of resolution. And when your eyes come back over here, this is higher resolution, but maybe not max. When you look over here, now that's max resolution and this is not. So that saves a lot of frames for faster frame rate. Frame rate makes a big difference in comfort and nausea, so being able to save frame rate wherever you can is amazing. It also allows things like positional targeting. When you're playing games like Elite Dangerous and you're flying this way but looking this way, you can be looking up. If you have a clear cockpit, you can be looking up and tracking a target while flying this way, and that totally works. And if you have guns on your ship that are based on where you look, you could be looking this way, firing this way, and flying that way. It is a game changer to be able to adjust where you're looking and have that be the thing that the game is tracking. So that inside-out, that foveated rendering and that eye tracking is a truly transformative experience for PCVR that you just don't get with something like the Quest 2 or the Quest 3. There's one other thing I should mention before we move off of the lenses, and that's OLED. So these have QLED lenses in them, and that's going to be a huge difference in the saturation of black in the image. So when you look at a gauge cluster and you can read all the text because of the clarity, but also if it's on a black background, that black will be much more deep. Or if you're in space, you're not going to have that kind of gray field with stars on top. You're going to have black, pure black with stars that are little pinouts. If you've never seen it before, I'm telling you, the first time you see it, it's going to blow your mind. So having that inside your headset versus something where you have, maybe you see kind of the screen door effect, or you can see those rings and those Fresnel lenses because of the type of lens versus the QLED lens. That's going to be a huge difference between these headsets. And you do see some of that on some other headsets that are out there that don't necessarily use an OLED lens. Now, I did mention that there's a bit of a weight difference between these two. This one weighs 850 pounds with the headset and strap behind there and the DMAS. This weighs 500. So for Freedom units, that's roughly 1.8 pounds and 1.1 pounds. Doesn't sound like a lot until you realize you're carrying that on the front of your face. Yes, there's some design choices to try and push this, the weight to the back, courtesy of this cushion, to try and sit behind kind of the saddle of your head to pull the weight backwards, but you're still wearing it on the front of your face. There's two major differences left between the two of these. First is the cable. So this let's get that unstuck here. This uses one DisplayPort 1.4, a USB-C, looks like 2.0, and then 1.1. So you needed two USB and one DisplayPort to hook this up. Whereas moving over to the Crystal Lite, you have one USB-C, one DisplayPort, and then it has, for power, instead of running that through USB, you have a port here that runs to an external power brick that you can plug in. It comes with an array of different plugs for different regions. They just slide in place like that. And you plug that into the far end of this rather than closer to the headset, and that supplies power to the entire unit. The last item is refresh rate. Now, refresh rate can make a huge difference in your overall VR comfort. If you have a low refresh rate, that can cause it to be a little bit stuttery, and that can make you nauseous. So this device had a refresh rate of 90 Hertz, and it could overclock to 115. Now, a lot of that is based on your video card. Your video card obviously has to match, and it has to be able to push all of that frames. Doesn't matter if you have a device that can do 115 frames per second if your video card can only do 20. So obviously these things have to match. So 90 Hertz, this one's 120 native. Now it'll support everything in between, 30, 60, 90, etc. But 120 is kind of a sweet spot. Anything above 90 is usually comfortable, and that's going to be enough to keep you from having any sort of positional nausea. It does help with that. If you do have that, higher refresh rates can help. So it's nice that this supports 120 without any need for fiddling. The only thing left to do is to hook this up to the PC and get to work. After a couple of weeks with the Pimax Crystal Lite, I wanted to make a quick correction before we talk about everything else that I've discovered. Yes, this does have foveated rendering, but not the type I described. If you want active foveated rendering, you're going to have to step up to the actual crystal. That full fat one has the active eye tracking. What this has is a stationary eye tracking, or I should say stationary foveated rendering, which is to say at the dead center is going to be the most resolution, and then as you move further and out towards the edge of your vision, it'll be less and less detail. I can tell you it's still very, very clear, but having used it a little bit more, I can see exactly what that looks like. It's still miles better than anything else on the market, but I did want to be very clear about that just for accuracy's sake. There are some compromises between the Crystal Lite and the main Crystal, and at least they're smart. They're smart compromises. The first being the foveated rendering that I just mentioned, but also resolution. So this has the 2048 per eye, whereas the main Crystal moves that all the way up to 4K per eye. Remember that you do have to have the hardware to drive that, not just GPU. You need to have the CPU to drive it as well. You will notice it in games like Microsoft Flight Simulator, especially 2024, when you are out flying over a place like New York, where there's a lot of moving things, a lot of traffic to calculate. All those things are not only GPU, but CPU bound. So make sure that you've got the CPU to keep up with the GPU, and then all of that can of course feed the headset, especially if you intend to keep that at full resolution. So keep that in mind. If you do intend to jump to the Crystal, you might be buying some future tech that you might not be able to take advantage of right out of the gate. The other primary difference is, well, this. The Crystal Lite is focused on a tethered experience. So that's going to have a cable that's going to run to your PC. And obviously that's going to leave you kind of distance limited on how far you can move. Now that said, the main Crystal moves to a completely wireless system. There are some add-ons that you can get for maximum speed, including a 60 gig per second add-on card. If we ever get our hands on one of those, we'll definitely cover that. But obviously you're talking about the difference between a device that can handle all of the capabilities inside of the headset without the need to worry about power, cooling, battery. All of those things go into the Crystal versus the Crystal Lite. Obviously two very different experiences. This requires a little bit of planning. Obviously, if you're going to do something where this is going to go overhead, I do like that this has this little ring back here. It does make it easy to do an overhead rig. If you have something that a device like my yaw that allows it to 360 degree, and you have an overhead crane type system, this works really well for that. But you do have to be mindful about cable lengths. Whereas with the main Crystal, obviously you don't have to worry about that. It's entirely wireless. So you have some differences that you need to weigh based on the type of simulations that you like to do. Obviously, if you're spending $5,000 on a chair, you're probably not gonna balk at an extra $2,000 for a headset. And I'm throwing a dart at a dartboard. It's actually less than $2,000, but we'll get into that, like I said, if I ever do manage to get my hands on one. Back to the Crystal Lite though, there are a lot of similarities between this headset and previous Crystals that we've used. I should say previous Pimax devices that we've used, like the 8K with the DMAS. This has a lot of the same capabilities. The sound on this is actually pretty stellar. I was surprised at just how clear it is. I didn't feel the need to throw in earbuds or especially cans. They worked really well for just jumping into Flight Simulator and enjoying the sounds around me. So a lot in common with those previous headsets, not just in terms of capabilities and resolution, but also just general kind of fit and finish. And that's one of the things that I actually don't like. One of the things about this device is that this ultra-wide headset does take up quite a bit of real estate on the front of your face. This kind of hard band here does take a lot of the weight off of the front of your face, but at the end of the day, you are wearing a brick on the front of your face. So being able to sync this behind the saddle of your head does help. It will help alleviate some of the pressure on the front, but I would like to see more weight in the back. You can accomplish that in a number of different ways on a portable headset by putting a battery back there, but obviously with this, you're not doing that. The other thing that I noticed is that the interface with your face, which is to say this portion right here, is not as comfortable on this as you would like. So this is just like the 8K DMAS. this interface right here. On the DMAS, it was kind of this leatherette type material. And on this device, you can see that it is this kind of soft cloth. That soft cloth, infinitely better than on the 8K DMAS, but not quite as comfortable in terms of fit to your face. So you can get an adapter that allows it to kind of push forward, but that does tweak other things as well. A lot of the capabilities of this device, such as the expanded width of your vision, is based off of the distance to your eyeballs. And if you start putting things in between your face and the device, suddenly you have changed that distance and you've changed that overall width of your FOV. So these are all things to keep in mind if you do intend to go with this headset. Are any of them deal breakers? Absolutely not. That's what we're going to talk about: clarity. There's a number that talks about clarity, and it's not just resolution, and it's not just about refresh. It's PPD. PPD is your per pixel density. Now, you'll see that thrown around a lot. What does it actually mean? You're talking about the density of pixels per degree of that width that we talked about earlier. That basically, how much can you pack into one space? The more dense it is, the better your image is going to be. Now, the Quest 3, with its lenses, does a fantastic job of providing a really great picture at 25 ppd. This uses those aspheric lenses that we were talking about earlier, which are infinitely clearer than any lens I've seen on the market, but it does so at 35 ppd. Now, again, I keep comparing it to a headset I don't have in my hands, but I do know that the main Crystal and the Crystal Super are either 50 or 57, if memory serves, ppd. So if this is not clear enough, you can practically double it. So that said, 35 ppd is incredibly clear. Hopping into Flight Simulator, you can read every gauge at a distance. Normally you'd have to kind of zoom in on a gauge and kind of look at it directly to see exactly what's being displayed. On any other headset, you might see some slight miscoloration or some slight blurriness. Not so here. 35 ppd makes this incredibly easy to read. You want to read a newspaper? You absolutely can. Not only can you read it, but it's comfortable to read. So there's a huge difference in just overall clarity of image, but also clarity of what's within the image. When you're looking at gauges, especially if you're kind of looking off in your peripheral vision, which when you have a huge gauge cluster for a plane, that's important. Being able to do that at a glance and at an angle is huge. So that alone is a game changer from something like the Quest 3 to this device. So regardless of whether you're using the Quest 3 with a cable or with in wireless mode, that PPD is not going to change. But I'm telling you, this with its cable, 35 PPD, amazing. The other one I mentioned just a second ago, and that is refresh rate. Now, you can get higher refresh rates on the Quest 3. You can get that up to 90, and 90 is really comfortable. 90 is very smooth. But what if you could go higher? Well, obviously, the more smooth it is, the more comfortable it's going to be. Especially if you suffer from nausea, the smoother you can get that image, especially when you're turning, the smoother you can get that image, the better. And this will go up to 120 native. I mentioned that earlier. And seeing it in motion, it makes a huge difference, especially when you're flying this way, but you're looking this way. So when you're flying a plane, more often than not, especially something like a Cessna where you might not have a whole lot of instrumentation, you're probably flying here, but the gauge cluster is kind of, your glass is really here. You're not seeing a great deal. You're kind of looking down to spot where the runway is so you can make your approach. And you're not doing like what you see most people do in Flight Simulator, where you're just like, all right, I'm just gonna kind of whip it around and land. There's kind of a dog leg approach to landing where you're landing with the wind and you're using that crosswind to allow yourself to land smoothly. So making that approach requires a lot of kind of looking up, looking over, and having that smooth motion of being able to very quickly change from looking at this distance at your gauge cluster to looking all the way down there, like if you're landing in Sedona. Sedona is a great airport example because it's up on a plateau. So you may be really high and you're kind of looking down at this plateau. So you're looking at all these different distances, and that refresh rate makes a huge difference when you're looking at 20 feet, then you're looking at 200 feet, and then you're looking back at 20 feet in a matter of a couple of seconds. So those kind of quick motions and those kind of quick adjustments for your eyes, the faster the refresh rate, the more smooth that's gonna be, the better that's gonna be, especially if you suffer from positional nausea. I did bring these out. There's absolutely nothing special with these. If these look really familiar, well, I mean, we've kind of seen these particular types of controllers. These obviously have the Pimax button here. I'm pretty sure if you change that out with a different button, you'd know exactly what headset belongs to. So if you're familiar with this type of controller, then this is not going to be any sort of surprise to you. It does work well for things like VTOL VR. You know, you're using it to kind of grip your control surfaces, grab the stick here, grab the collector over here, and you're using that and twisting here. It works really well for that. Obviously for shooters, it works really well. These also fit in kind of standard controller things. I have a VR game that is ace shooting, and these literally slot into a pistol, and it fits this type of controller. So should they ever decide to allow that move over to PCVR, I'd be able to use this controller in that. Right now it's Quest 3 only, but should they make that move, these controllers are gonna work. It also means that all the accessories that you can buy for these, for the Quest 3, are gonna work for these just fine. The last stop on any hardware review is always twofold: price and warranty. We're gonna start with warranty. The warranty on this device and the controller to start is 1 year. And you can buy an extension, but you gotta do it up front. You only have 30 days to make up your mind if you wanna buy an extended warranty, and you can either do it as a 1-year extension or a 2-year extension. Now, there's been much ado about how this is priced. I'm telling you, it is not as complex as people would like you to believe. The price up front for this is $599, but there's an additional fee on top of that. When you buy this device at $599, you're going to be subscribed to Pimax Play, and you're probably thinking, "Oh my God, I don't need another store." It's not a store. What that is, it's the software that runs all of this. It's kind of the ecosystem for Pimax, and that's across all Pimax devices. And that's going to be your firmware updates, your connectivity, all of that stuff kind of goes through that software. Now, why should I have to subscribe to that, right? Well, all they're really doing is breaking up the purchase price to make it more palatable, because that's going to make up the other portion of the price, which, depending on when you catch it on sales, around $250. So all in, you're somewhere around $800 to $850. Again, sales make a difference on that kind of stuff. We just had Black Friday sales that actually at the time of recording are still going on. And then there's always Black Friday, I'm sorry, I said Black Friday, Prime Day sales, and there's always Black Friday sales and holiday sales and everything else. But I've got good news if you've owned a previous Pimax device. If you have a Pimax device, you can take another $200, I should say up to another $200 off as a trade-in. So you can take that previous device that you're no longer using, trade it into Pimax. You can trade that device in towards a Pimax device and take potentially up to another $200 off the price. You're starting to get into a price range that's very close to what Meta is doing with the Quest 3, but with all of the advanced capabilities of all these devices. So that applies to both the Crystal and the Crystal Lite. Again, you'll have to look into the details on that to see if it affects you, but it is something to consider. I should also mention that that subscription, once you're done, you own it forever. You're done paying for it. You're lock, stock, and barrel completely paid off. So if that's a concern for you, well, obviously you can certainly pay that off and then just be done with it and enjoy your headset from now until forever. So the question becomes, who is this headset for? Well, that really depends. If you're an entry person right into VR and you're not sure if you really want to jump in, a Quest 3 or even a used Quest 2 might be your entry point. You're going to figure out if VR is for you or not. If you're a simulation person, if you dig over-the-road trucking, or if you enjoy flight simulators or racing, well, you're probably going to want to have a little bit more fidelity than that. When you start adding in things like wheels, you're starting to think about immersion. You know, you're not going to buy a wheel and just go, well, I guess I'm good. I can tell you as a fellow addict, you're going to keep wanting to add to that immersion. I have a vest that has haptic feedback. I have a motion simulation rig. This stuff adds up. It's like getting a tattoo. Once you start, you just can't stop. And this is simply an extension of that. When I jump into the cockpit of a plane, I want to be there. I want to be completely immersed in it. So as little friction as I can get between that that feeling and the game itself, the better. So that means having a really high-end video card. It means having a really high-end PC, and ultimately, this is my high-end TV. It just happens to be stuck to our face where our parents said don't sit too close to the TV. Well, now we're sitting the TV close to our face. So who is this for? You're kind of in this enthusiast tier. $850, yeah, that's a lot of money for a VR headset, but the quality is such a cut above those entry-level devices that you're kind of in kind of rarefied air. You're not the top tier. You're not certainly buying into that Crystal device or this super expensive stuff like the Apple device that has no software, or the Varjo that is extraordinarily expensive. But you are buying into something that gets you into that mid-tier and lets you go, wow, this is what it can be. Now that said, maybe you get into this device and you go, huh, okay, that's amazing, but could it be better? Yeah, it can be. If you've got the hardware to drive it, yeah, the Crystal, I've gotten to see it at trade shows. It's hard to even describe. So just know that if you do pick up a Crystal Lite, it may be something that you grow into and suddenly find yourself wanting more. So it's up to you to decide how much you want to dive into this. I can tell you though, if you're done with the starter stuff, this is the destination. I'm Ron Burke, editor-in-chief for Gamingtrend.com. Let me know in the comments, where are you in your VR journey? Are you still jumping into VR on the regular? Are you a simmer? Do you like to drive? Do you like to fly? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks everybody. Appreciate you sticking around. We'll see you again very soon.